Black Hills Forest is a small expanse of wilderness located in western Maryland. It lies in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains and consists of only rolling hills and a narrow river named Tappy East Creek. The Nanticoke tribe had first settled the region, and many of their villages flourished in the surrounding area. Notably, however, the tribe refused to settle anywhere actually within the Black Hills Forest, indicating that they feared the lands, or perhaps believed that they were cursed. In 1632, a man named Martin Fapo led an expedition with 12 men into the Appalachians. Fapo was a cousin of Cecil Calvert, who at the time was serving as the proprietor of the newly established British colony of Maryland, and was tasked with determining the site for a trading post in the western reaches of the territory. This trading post would then also serve as a garrison, as the colony's western flank was left undefended, vulnerable to attacks from both the natives and the French. Fapo was guided westwards by a Yaucomico Indian who was familiar with the area, and the expedition set off without problem. Once the party reached the Catoctin, however, the Yaucomico, nicknamed Robert by the Englishmen, refused to go any farther. He could not be persuaded by Fapo, as neither one knew the other's language, and so the party was forced to stop and camp for the night. That evening, Robert attempted to drive off the party's horses in order to sabotage the expedition, but during this effort, one of the party's members mistook him for an intruder and shot him. Now left without a guide, the group is forced to return to Baltimore, unsuccessful in their mission. In a later letter to his cousin, Calvert, regarding their recent failure, Fapo suggests another expedition, one more reinforced with soldiers and surveyors, suggested to be led by a certain Colonel Nathaniel Blair. Blair would lead the next expedition in 1634 and successfully established an outpost upon a 3,000-acre lot near the Black Hills Forest. Soon after, several families moved into the area, and a village is built up around the fort. The township adopts the name Blair, named in respect of its founder and de facto leader. Nathaniel would only lead the town for a year, though, as in 1635 he died due to illness, and his wife, Virginia, subsequently took over. On the 10th of November 1700, Daniel Elly Kedward is born in Llynfehangach Glenmiffer in Wales. There he is raised as a sheep farmer, but moves in 1725 to southern Ireland to pursue his passion for art. He settles in the small town of Glengariff and meets there a local sheep farmer named Coilen McCaffin. Daniel then starts working on Coilen's farm and soon becomes well acquainted with his daughter, Eidmer. 3 years later, on the 25th of December 1728, Daniel and Eidmer marry, and in the months following are expecting a child. The year following, however, Daniel is plagued with smallpox and dies on the 19th of October. 2 days later, Eidmer births her child, but dies in the hours after due to blood loss. A drifter later happens upon the homestead and finds the child along with a note that reads her name, Eilis Abigail Kedward. He then brings her to a Catholic orphanage nearby in Park na Glenna, where Ellis would spend her childhood. Legends claim, however, that Daniel actually survived after Ellie's birth and raised her for the first 10 years of her life. He is later taken captive during agrarian hooded revolts, tortured, and disemboweled. Ellie is left for dead with her body impaled to her father's corpse, but is saved later by a passing eremite who returns her to health and teaches her aspects of witchcraft. Instead, as written in her diary, Ellie describes her childhood as being a prisoner of the orphanage. She recounts the poor living conditions, her routine abuse, and her escapist fantasies, particularly how she would make figures out of twigs to act as part of her imaginary army. At age 10, Ellie escapes the orphanage and flees south to the city of Skibbereen, where there she is attacked by ruffians who steal her clothes. Left naked on the streets, she is arrested and charged with being a child prostitute. Ellie would continue to be raised now in prison, still finding escape in her fantasies while also seeking salvation through the Catholic faith. Around this time, the Great Frost occurred in Ireland. Food shortages led to prisons being shut down, ultimately leaving Ellie homeless. She left Skibbereen in search for a better home, and soon found St. John's Chapel in Gregorfan. There she was taken in by a priest, a Father Tierney, who spent the next 7 years raising her. Here, Ellie learned how to read and write, and even some how to compose music and poetry. In 1750, Father Tierney developed a tumor, and knowing he was to die soon, made a final pilgrimage to the island monastery of Skellig Michael, leaving Ellie alone once again. Several years later, Ellie ends up joining 2 Catholic sisters residing in St. Catherine's Monastery, where they engage in a cult-like matriarchal interpretation of Catholicism. When a priest unexpectedly arrives, he is taken captive and eventually killed, being pushed out of a window as he tried to escape. Unconfirmed sources document what happens later in Ellie's adulthood, the most popular claiming that she spent a lot of time in and out of prisons and asylums, where she suffered 7 miscarriages and the loss of 2 husbands due to both illness and war. During this time, she is said to also have methodically created stick figures that she would hang from trees. She built small cairns out of stones as graves of void maternity, and would scrawl texts written in transitus fluvi with her own blood on the walls of the dungeon in Wexford, in which she was ultimately imprisoned. Elly only breaks free after a fire ensues the town, and in an effort to escape her hardships, Elly is documented immigrating to America aboard the ship Reliant, which landed in Baltimore in the summer of 1769. It is claimed that Elly spent some time in Baltimore caring for the children of a widower named Crandall, but left soon after as the family was killed in a house fire. Around 1770, Elly settles in the township of Blair, and a man named Bowen sells her a small house and a plot of land in the nearby woods in exchange for a year's work of sewing and eggs. In February of 1785, several children in the town accuse Elly of luring them to her home, bleeding them through pricking and making potions out of their blood. Some believe this to be an attempt by Elly to cure disease or ward off a curse, but other reports claim that it was more resembling of malevolent witchcraft, in which she told the children to stand in the corner and slap their bloody handprints on the rune-inscribed walls. Regardless, she is put on trial and quickly convicted, punished by banishment from the town in the midst of a particularly harsh winter, a fate that would certainly kill her. Various reports and legends describe how Elly was banished, some saying she was simply forced into the wilderness and presumed dead. Another claims that she was blindfolded and bound to a wheelbarrow, or hung from a tree with rocks tied to each of her limbs so as to stretch them out. The most common theory, though, is that she was bound to a tree and left for dead. Sometime later, children returned to see if Elly had died yet, but when they found her still alive, they slashed her with sticks and knives and released their dogs onto her. They dipped their hands in her blood to make handprints over her skin, before untying her and hanging her from a branch of the same tree from which she had been bound. In the next months, the town's children began disappearing, starting first with the young lady who first accused her. By midwinter, half of the town's children were gone, and the townspeople blamed the disappearances on Elly. As soon as the weather broke next spring, Blair was abandoned, with the townspeople vowing never to utter the name Elly Kedward again, only referring to her now as the Blair Witch. In or around the year 1809, a book is published entitled The Blair Witch Cult. No author is listed, but some claim it to be written by a Josiah Burke. The book is a handwritten, largely fictional collection of ramblings detailing practices of the occult and legends of sorcery. One of its stories recounts how witches from England escaped trial by fleeing to America and settling in places such as Salem. Another recounts the happenings of Blair shortly after Elly's banishment, involving child sacrifice, shape-shifting witches, and the formation of a cult around the Blair Witch. Elly is also described in this text to have a frightening appearance, a figure covered in horse-like hair with a face resembling that of a man's, and that she walked without her feet touching the ground. The book is written in English and Latin, along with other indecipherable scripts and unknown symbols. Only one badly damaged copy exists to this day. In 1823, while a railroad is under construction in western Maryland, a worker becomes lost while riding his horse in the woods to the south. He stumbles across an overgrown road that leads into the abandoned township of Blair. The ruins seem like those of an ancient civilization, though other reports claim the town looked almost pristine in its abandoned state, with local legends saying that it had been cursed by a witch. The railroad worker contacts a land developer he knows named Peter Branwell Burkitt, who soon then purchases the lands, figuring it could potentially be the site of a thriving city rivaling those of Baltimore and Philadelphia. In 1824, Burkittsville is officially established and is named in honor of its founder. Many families moved into Burkittsville within a year, and by the end of its first summer, locals gather for an annual wheat harvest picnic, which was to be held by Tappies Creek to the east of the town. A young Eileen Treacle, aged somewhere between 8 and 10, was wading about in the creek, which had a depth of no more than 2 feet. 11 witnesses then claimed to hear splashing, as they then saw an arm reach up out of the water and pull Eileen under. Inexplicably, she drowns, and her body is never recovered. For the next 13 days, the water of the creek becomes foul and unusable, with oily bundles of sticks washing up near the town. Many of the town's livestock and the local who routinely use the water for drinking die as a result. In March of 1886, 8-year-old Robin Weaver is walking alone in the woods near Burkittsville. A lady then appeared to her dressed in all white, not walking but rather floating in the air. The lady took Robin by the hand and led her back to her house deeper in the woods, where Robin was left in the basement and was told that she would be back soon. Several hours pass, however, but the woman does not return. Robin becomes scared and escapes the house by crawling through a window. During her disappearance, Robin is reported missing and a search party is dispatched to find her. After 3 days, Robin appears again on her grandmother's porch, but the search party never returns. A second search party is set out to find the first, and weeks later, their bodies are finally found. Upon a stone slab on the banks of Tappaease Creek, referred to local hunters as Coffin Rock, are found the bodies of all 5 members of the missing search party. Their corpses lay bound together at the hands and feet, with the ropes cutting deep into their flesh, indicating they were still alive when this all happened. The bodies were severely decomposing and completely disemboweled, stripped of all their clothing. On their faces, hands, and feet, unrecognizable symbols were carved deeply and precisely into their flesh. This second search party returned then to town to get help in removing the bodies, but when they returned only a few hours later, the bodies had disappeared. The stench of death and the presence of vultures were still present when they returned. Sometime later, around the 1890s, a folk song is published called The Dreary Black Hills. The lyrics warn of the dangers of the Black Hills forest and make reference to the author's husband, a Tom Kane, who disappeared when out in the woods. It is unconfirmed but speculated that this could be referring to a Tom Lang, a confirmed member of the first search party that was found deceased on Coffin Rock. In 1903, Wilson Parr and Charity Sykes of Frederick County, Maryland have 2 sons, Dale and Rustin. When Dale was 9 years old, he and his father were out hunting in the woods when Dale was shot and killed. It was believed to be just a mere hunting accident, but the legends claim that Wilson Parr knowingly shot his son, long believing that Dale was the child of a witch, and that his wife had sacrificed other children in exchange for her own. Around this time, Rustin is reported to have moved to live with his aunt and uncle, who resided in Burkittsville. Some sources claim this is around the time when both of Rustin's parents died, but other records contradict this, suggesting they died later in the early 1930s. Rustin's uncle was a carpenter and raised Rustin in the trade by teaching him all he knew. Rustin stopped attending school in the 6th grade and was generally considered illiterate. Notably, Rustin had a preference for isolation and enjoyed the surrounding nature of Burkittsville. This motivated him in his early 20s to leave the town and build his own secluded cabin out in the woods. The shelter was located a 4-hour hike into the Black Hills Forest, somewhere nearby a stretch of Tappaease Creek. It was a 3-story house that took him 5 years to build, though it is also possible that Rustin instead settled in a house that was already built. His great-uncle, Eldon Sykes, owned a similar house on a property in that area that was built shortly after the incorporation of Burkittsville in 1824. Whether it is that Rustin lived in this house, built his own, or perhaps even built the new one atop the foundation of the old one is subject to debate. After settling in his new house, Rustin gradually stopped coming into town. Around this time, his aunt died and his uncle moved to Baltimore, leading Rustin to become a hermit. He only came into Burkittsville twice per year to buy supplies, and was regarded by the community as an odd but amicable person. Around 1939, during his long walks in the woods, Rustin began frequently seeing a figure in the distance. Whenever he tried approaching or calling out to it, it would disappear. He eventually came to realize that the figure was that of a woman, clad in a dark hooded robe with her face obscured. Rustin was not scared of the woman at first, rather only wondered who she was, as he was accustomed to helping lost hikers or those he came across on his remote property in the forest. Rustin then starts to hear voices in his head, first only at night while he's dreaming, but later while he's awake as well. It is now that Rustin begins to fear the woman, as he no longer sees the figure in the woods, but continues to hear her voices, which slowly deprive him of all his senses. The voices are that of an old woman, who speaks of all sorts of things in various different languages, sometimes repeating the same words over and over. When the voices would give him instructions, Rustin obeyed, in an attempt to get them to stop. At first, the instructions were for meaningless tasks, such as sleeping in the cellar for a week, but in November of 1940, the voice told him to go into town and take the first child he saw. On the 13th of November, Emily Hollins is abducted by Rustin Parr, lured with candy to his house in the woods. Weeks later, Kyle Brody, age 12, is also taken, and the two are kept in an upstairs room of his house. One day, as instructed by the voices, Rustin brings the two down into the cellar, and Kyle is told to stand in the corner and face the wall. Emily is then only heard screaming as Rustin cuts symbols into her face. Rustin would sometimes approach Kyle, only to say, "Do you hear her? Do you hear the woman's voice?" After several days, Emily is killed through disembowelment, and Rustin tells Kyle not to be sad, as he'll bring someone else back soon. 6 more children are abducted by Rustin over the following months. All 6 are killed in a manner similar to Emily, and likewise, Kyle was told to stand in the corner throughout all of them. Theory suggests that due to Kyle being the only one to know the other 7 children, and that he was the only one left to survive, it was actually Kyle that committed the murders, or at least compelled Rustin to carry out the acts. Around June of 1941, after Rustin had finished the 7th murder, he awoke one night to see the figure of the old woman in his room. The woman only told Rustin that if he went into town the next day and confessed to the murders, she would leave him alone. She then disappears. Rustin releases Kyle the next day and walks to the market in Burkittsville saying, "I'm finally finished." Police hike the 4 hours to his house and find there the bodies of the 7 missing children, buried in the cellar, each one ritualistically murdered and disemboweled. Covering the inside walls of his house are handprints and writings on the wall that Rustin later claimed to have been written by the ghost. The writing was determined to be Transitus Fluvii, a Hebraic alphabet often used by Old World witches in cults and secret societies. Some claim that Kyle was found by police on the porch of Rustin Parr's house, dazed and unable to speak. Others say that he arrived back in town while the police were out and began telling people of what Rustin had been doing. Rustin is put on trial for the murder of the 7 children, during which he claims that the voices made him do it. The voice of a ghost woman whose face he never saw. He never claims it to be the Blair Witch, but when asked, he only thinks it could have been. Kyle testifies against Rustin, detailing the events of the abductions and murders, including even the details about Emily, who was abducted well before him. Rustin pleads guilty, seemingly with little remorse, as he feels sorry for what he's done, but is also glad to be free from the voices. The trial concludes on the 17th of July, and flags in Burkittsville are set at half-mast in respect for the victims. Before his execution, Rustin speaks privately with a priest and asks for forgiveness. Rustin confesses that he actually didn't kill the children, but when the priest offers to take his confession to the judge, Rustin refuses. While on suicide watch alone in his cell, a guard claims that Rustin would say the phrase, "never given," though no one is sure what he meant by it. On the 22nd of November, before a crowd of hundreds, Rustin is hanged at the Rockville Gallows. Around this time, some Burkittsville residents go out to Rustin's house in the woods and burn it down. Around 1944, while some townspeople are joking about sending Rustin Parr to fight the Germans overseas, an elderly Robin Weaver passes by while rambling, "Send the voices. I know those voices. Send them the voices." Robin was 66 at the time and considered crazy by the locals, with it unsure if she remembered her disappearance in her youth. Throughout the mid-1900s, Kyle Brody goes on to live a troubled life. He was already noted in his childhood to be mentally disturbed, fighting often with others and being a victim of parental abuse. His sister, Janine, recounts how he once captured frogs and dismembered them in an effort to see if they have feelings. Later in his childhood, he would occasionally have bouts of behavior reminiscent of aspects of his abduction. Some of these incidents included hiding under the bed for the whole night, or locking his sister and her friends in the basement out of fear for the then-deceased Rustin Parr. Some days he would act completely normal, while others he would be found stood in the corner, asking Rustin if it was okay to turn around now. In his adulthood, Kyle ended up homeless in Baltimore, where he was arrested often for vagrancy, shoplifting, and robbery. On the 16th of July, 1947, Kyle was arrested in Baltimore for panhandling. He was arrested and then released, vanishing for some 2 years before he turned up again in Leesburg, Florida. On the 21st of December, 1956, Kyle is arrested for urinating in a public fountain and resisting arrest. He's extradited back to Baltimore, as he's wanted for earlier crimes there. During his trial, his state-appointed lawyer attempts to use an insanity plea to get Kyle out of jail, and rather put in a psychiatric hospital. He is subsequently diagnosed with schizophrenia and institutionalized at the Maryland State Institute for the Criminally Insane. Kyle would live at MSICI for another 4 years, until his sister then advocates for better treatment, insisting that Kyle was not criminally insane and would function better in a more compassionate environment. In 1961, he was relocated to Reston Hill Sanitarium in Atlanta, where he spent the next 5 years. In 1966, Kyle is deemed a difficult inmate to both the other patients and the staff, and so was sent back to MSICI in Baltimore. He's given a variety of experimental medication and treatment, which puts him in a catatonic-like state. In 1969, a film archivist by the name of Chris Carrasco documents the conditions and happenings of Maryland asylums in a film entitled White Enamel. The main footage featuring Kyle includes him repeating the phrase, "never given," and footage discovered later shows him writing on a notepad in the Transitus Fluvii alphabet, hinting that Kyle was responsible for the writing on the walls of Rustin Parr's cabin, and that he was ultimately involved with the murders. On the 12th of March 1971, Kyle Brody commits suicide in his cell, having cut his wrists with a wooden spoon that he sharpened on the floor. While studying film at Montgomery College in Rockville, Maryland, Heather Donahue sets out to make her thesis film, consisting of a documentary based on the legend of the Blair Witch. Heather was raised in New York City, but every summer would visit her grandparents, who lived in Burkittsville. Heather's grandfather, Randy Donahue, was the first to tell Heather stories of ghosts and witches that haunted the area, notably his supposed encounter with the Blair Witch. As a child, Randy would frequent a swimming hole in Tappahees Creek, and one time, when out alone, he was walking the overgrown trail that led to the creek. While pushing back a tree branch, someone grabs it from him, an old, unsightly woman with hair covering her arms. "Donahue," is all she says, before Randy turns back and runs away, left forever haunted by the experience. On the 20th of October 1994, Heather drives out to Burkittsville for a weekend of filming, with a company of classmates Michael Williams and Joshua Leonard. There, they interview an assortment of locals, including a Mary Brown, who claims in her youth to have seen the Blair Witch near Tappy East Creek, described as having black fur with a frightening visage, clad in a black shawl. The next day, the filmmakers interviewed 2 local fishermen, one of them claiming to have once seen a wispy figure rise up out of the creek. The filmmakers then trek out into the wilderness and never return. Only a few days later, they were reported missing, and the police issue an APB. A massive search party is dispatched, and after 33,000 man-hours, only Josh's abandoned car is discovered, parked off the side of Black Rock Road. On the 5th of November, the search is officially called off, and on the 19th of June the following year, the case is classified as inactive and left unsolved. On the 16th of October, while a University of Maryland anthropology class was conducting a dig in the Black Hills Forest, they come across lost items belonging to the missing filmmakers. A bag of tapes, film equipment, and Heather's journal was found buried underneath the foundations of a ruined house, dating somewhere between 70 and 100 years old. The bag was only discovered after a rock wall of the foundation had collapsed. An analysis of the environment proves it to be an impossible location for it to have ended up. Atop the foundation was an undisturbed layer of ash, and the rocks surrounding seemed long untouched, therefore making it forensically impossible, it seemed, for the bag to have been placed there recently. The origin of the stone foundation is never confirmed, but many speculate that it was the foundation of Rustin Parr's house. The lost footage is developed and then analyzed, revealing numerous inconsistencies, leading many to believe that the footage and previous disappearance was a hoax organized by the filmmakers. The last of the footage, which seems to depict the group's demise, takes place in a house that matches images of Rustin Parr's house, specifically photographs of the walls covered in handprints. This would be impossible, however, as the house was burned down some 50 years prior. Also impossible is the hill approaching the house, a some 200-foot 45-degree incline, which doesn't match any of the known topology of the Black Hills Forest. The footage also doesn't align with any timeline of the disappearance, as search parties were combing the area from as soon as the 25th. The filmmakers, though, remained lost and seemingly perished on the night of the 27th. In February of 1996, Mary Brown is interviewed regarding the disappearance, during which she claims that on the night of the 23rd of December, 1994, she witnessed an apparition of Joshua Leonard stood outside the door of her trailer, screaming in pain and covered in injuries. Another interview, with search volunteer Emily McKenna, reports that the search party never found the missing students due to them looking in the wrong part of the woods, notably that they were avoiding the old house, known to the locals as the Blair Witch House. In 1997, a production company by the name of Haxon Films is contracted by the families of the disappeared film students to piece together their found footage. 2 years later, it is compiled into a film that receives international appeal, entitled The Blair Witch Project.